When first-round draft pick Tyler Smith stepped foot in Dallas last season, he was given a pretty big role pretty early, filling in for the future Hall of Famer Tyron Smith after he went down with an injury in training camp. Now, going into this year's season, you don't want to have inconsistencies at offensive line, so how do you address it? This is Building the Board. I'm Hailey Sutton, and today we're talking offensive line. Let's go ahead and bring in Patrik "No-See" Walker to talk about this interesting conundrum that the Cowboys are in with the offensive line. It just feels like there's so much veteran experience on this roster, so much talent, but at some point you got to start thinking about consistency. You don't want to be playing musical chairs during the season like we did last year. How do you tackle that in the draft?
Well, quiet as it's kept, the Cowboys have been more or less rebuilding the offensive line since the retirement of Travis Frederick at center. The drafting of Tyler Biadasz helped save them at that role, but guess what? Biadasz is going into a contract season. They're going to look to some youth, Matt Farniok and Matt Miletsko, the interior lineman and the swing tackle respectively, but those two guys spent time on the injured reserve list. Tyler Smith helped save the day for the Cowboys. He was above and beyond what they could have anticipated for year one. He was inside, he was outside, and he did all of this having been relegated to only one role, which was left guard, the entirety of training camp, but he was able to move around. Tyron Smith is back on a restructured deal, a rework deal to be more specifically, so that's going to help save the day, but Jason Peters is no longer in the building to kind of help stabilize things at the right tackle position. Terrence Steele coming off of a torn ACL. You know what you get from Zach Martin. You know what you get from a healthy Tyron Smith, and now you know what you get from Tyler Smith, but Connor McGovern is gone. Tyler Biadasz in a contract year. You're going to have to add some talent.
Yeah, it's tricky for sure, and especially when you think about what these offensive linemen endure from a physicality standpoint. It's no surprise that a lot of these guys end up banged up. You think about Terrence Steele. We're excited. We've been seeing him get back into it. Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones telling us he's ahead of his rehab. So that's exciting to think about. But at some point, you got to start answering that and looking ahead to the future.
Yeah, you definitely need to. They're going to look to a guy like Matt Miletsko, who in training camp was showing some great things, but he also went down early in training camp. Took the majority of the season to kind of get healthy with that shoulder subluxation. Never quite did. So we'll see what he can do. The potential is most certainly there. But then you start to hear Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones talk about potentially backing down Terrence Steele to swing tackle. Speculation of will he be moved to left guard? You don't know, and because you don't know, the best thing to do is look at a guy like O'Cyrus Torrence, look at a guy like Steve Avila out of TCU. These are guys who can plug and play, impact day one players. The Cowboys are going to be looking for offensive line players in this year's draft early on.
I agree. It's an opportunity to get some new faces here in this building and an opportunity for us to get to know them a little bit better. We're going to bring in Youmans to break down some of these offensive linemen who could make an impact for the Cowboys.
If you were to go and poll most Cowboys fans, offensive line is probably the number one need. I would be one of those to say that offensive line is the number one need for the Cowboys to pick up a premium talent in this year's NFL draft. But the big thing about this position as a whole is, like Hailey said, this isn't necessarily cut and dry. There are multiple options for the Cowboys to go, whether it's at 26 or at 58, premium picks on the offensive line. We're going to take a look at not one, not two, but three different options here, starting with probably one of the top options because he's a true guard prospect, and that's O'Cyrus Torrence. Here's what he's measured at right now. 330 is what he measured in at the Combine. He was 336 at the Senior Bowl. He was 346 during his playing days at Florida. He had over 1,500 pass blocking snaps during his time with the Gators, did not allow a single sack. And that's kind of the big knock against him, is that whenever he's moving in pass protection, he's having to go backwards, and this is where he's at right here against Georgia. When he's having to move backwards, things don't always go his way. But whenever he's able to move forwards and he's able to go up the field, it's a little bit different. Here he is in a pass blocking set, and he just holds his own. Look at the pad height. He gets underneath. He has great leverage. He actually resets with that right hand as soon as the block was disengaged. He re-engaged and kept his footing all the way through. I like O'Cyrus Torrence more than most. I have a back half first round grade on the guy, but for the most part, if he's there at 26, he might be your best plug and play now option. But your best ceiling option might be the next guy that we're breaking down. Steve Avila from TCU. There's so much talent with this TCU team. We've broken down Quentin Johnston on this show before. We've talked about some of the Max Duggans of the world. But this is Steve Avila. He might be one of the most underrated players from that national championship runner-up TCU Horned Frogs. Here's his measurables: 6'3.5". You got 332 pounds. Consensus All-American. You'll see why against Oklahoma State here on this clip. And if you go ahead and go here he is at the left guard spot. Again, true guard. You're going to see him come in and play guard immediately. And just like Torrance has heavy hands and heavy feet for the most part. Avila has light feet and light hands. If you were to combine the two of them, where as an offensive lineman you want to see heavy hands and light feet, it would be great. But now you got to pick your poison between a guy like Torrance, who's heavy, and a guy like Avila, who's a little bit on the lighter end in terms of resetting the hands. And you can see him actually have some success there against Oklahoma State. One more guy I want to look at, and he's not a true guard. This is Darnell Wright, 6'5", 333 pounds. And the one thing about Wright is very similar to what we saw with Tyler Smith last year. Just because he played tackle in college does not mean you can't move him inside. And I actually think Darnell Wright is more equipped to move inside at the next level than Tyler Smith was. That would leave Tyler Smith on the outside, which is where he was more successful even as a rookie. Here he is playing right tackle against Alabama. That's Will Anderson. That might be the #1 player that's not a quarterback in this draft off the board. Look at the way that Darnell Wright handles him, and he did this throughout this game. Really shut down Will Anderson. Anderson tries to spin back inside. Great adjustment. Wright stays with him every step of the way. Had great leverage. Was backing up into an option like that. You have the athleticism with him, the frame, the bottom half, the lower half, the footwork that you need from a guard to tight end, or excuse me, a guard to tackle prospect that can go back and forth. Darnell Wright is more equipped to do that now than Tyler Smith was, but if you want to go guard, it's going to be Avila and it's going to be Torrance. Those are really your only two options where the value fits at pick number 26.
Hey, listen, anytime you can put Will Anderson in a spin cycle, I'm all about getting that guy here in Dallas. Kyle, I want to piggyback off something you just said, though. You talked about those first two guys being guards and maybe that being the way it leans. But let's say it doesn't pan out that way, right? How do the Cowboys sort of approach this draft when it comes to taking an offensive lineman like that?
It's interesting because, like you said, it is a need, but it's not an immediate need. And you have some of the moving and the shaking with Terrence Steele, Tyron Smith. But you also look at the top 5 prospects in this draft. Peter Skoronski from Northwestern, Paris Johnson Jr. from Ohio State, Broderick Jones from Georgia, and DeJuan Jones from Ohio State as well. And then I have Darnell Wright in there as well. What do they all have in common? They're all offensive tackles. The guard class as a whole is not top heavy. You have Avila, you have Torrance, so you can maybe get those guys at 26. But if you wanted to get an impact player, you could even trade back into the early parts of that second round, maybe recoup some of those picks and still get a guy like Avila and Torrance to come in and play an immediate impact, because you have starting caliber players, but you don't have that perfect overall prospect that's within reach for the Cowboys. There's some good talent in this class as a whole, but the Cowboys just don't have a chance to take a look at it.
And that's the beauty of it for the Cowboys. And you talk about a situation where whether it be the 26th pick, the 58th pick, if they do it in round 3 or later, they have to make sure that whomever they bring onto the roster in this year's draft is an impact player from day one. Again, as we talked about, Hailey, you lose Connor McGovern to free agency. Tyler Biadasz, albeit a center, contract year. You have some interior line questions there, and those interior line questions are starting to kind of feed their way out to the edges, because now you don't know if Tyler Smith is going to be completely relegated to the left tackle role. You don't know where you're going with Tyron Smith, Terrence Steele, so forth and so on. Solve the left guard problem, and you'll solve everything else for your offensive line.
Let's get into a little science here real quick, because it's so interesting when you think about the difference between tackle and guard and what that truly means.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at these guys from a position-specific lens, how beneficial is it to have a guy like, let's say, Tyler Smith, who played this one position and then got moved in the middle of everything and then succeeded at it? Is that now a skill or a level that teams are paying attention to when they're looking at their draft guys?
For me, I think we've already been spoiled by what Tyler Smith can do. And you love what you saw from Tyron Smith, future first ballot Hall of Famer, going from his usual position at left tackle to right tackle because of injuries at that position. But you also look at a guy like Zach Martin, another first ballot Hall of Famer. Could Zach Martin pop out to the right tackle position? Yes, he can. But the reason he doesn't necessarily want to is because guess what? He got injured when he did. You love guys who can not only flex, but sometimes you just need that one guy who is elite at that one one thing that he does, and I think this is what the Cowboys need to look for in left guard.
Oh, yeah. If you could absolutely pick 5 guys and they're going to stay at that one position because they're elite at all 5 of those positions, then great. The thing that you got to be careful with position flex, and that's a term that, at least as draft nerds, you either hate or you love it. Because, yes, it means versatility. You can move and you can mix and match. But then you get stuck in a spin cycle where Tyler Smith is not only your left guard, but he's your right guard, he's your right tackle, he's your left tackle. And then you don't get to see the development of a really talented player at one specific position. And you nix some of that early development in his career by using him in position flex. It's more of that jack of all trades, master of none sort of mentality. You want a master at your position. You want somebody that's so good at playing left guard that you don't have to worry about them. Right guard, you have that. And Zach Martin, you're not going to move Zach Martin no matter what. I mean, he can move mountains. You're not moving him. That's what's going to happen with whoever they draft here. They're going to have to look at the balance between, are they good enough to be a starter at the NFL level at a certain position? And yes, if need be, can they move? But that doesn't need to be the number one trait that these guys have. They got to be able to be ready, NFL ready now, in order to make this roster and make an impact early.
No musical chairs here.
Not in 2023.
Continuity. Let's find it.
Please.
Make it happen.
Maybe that's the new word of the year, continuity.
Continuity, please.
All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of Building the Board. For Kyle, for Patrik, I'm Hailey, and we'll see you guys next time.